A shocking act of racism in a corporate office turned into a tale of unexpected consequences. Water splashed across a black woman's face without provocation, an act of pure discrimination that would soon unravel careers and expose deep-seated prejudice. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The lobby of Parker Tech Solutions gleamed under the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Polished marble floors reflected the light, creating an almost ethereal glow throughout the expansive space. Olivia Carter's heels clicked rhythmically as she approached the security desk, her heart fluttering with anticipation. In her hands, she carefully balanced two items: a meticulously wrapped silver anniversary gift box and a container of homemade bulgogi, her husband's favorite Korean dish that she'd spent the morning preparing. "Good afternoon," Olivia said warmly to the receptionist, a young woman whose eyes widened slightly upon seeing her. "I'm here to surprise my husband, David Carter. It's our 5th anniversary today." The receptionist smiled and began typing something into her computer when a sharp voice cut through the ambient hum of the lobby. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" Olivia turned to find Rebecca Stone, the HR director, striding toward her with unmistakable purpose. The woman's blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, her expression cold and assessing as her gaze traveled from Olivia's face to the packages in her arms. "I'm just here to see my husband," Olivia explained, maintaining her composure despite the sudden tension. "It's our anniversary." Rebecca's lips thinned into a tight line. "And who exactly is your husband?" Her tone suggested disbelief, as if Olivia couldn't possibly be connected to anyone important in the building. David Carter," Olivia replied, straightening her shoulders. "The CEO." Something flickered across Rebecca's face. Surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. She took a step closer, her voice rising deliberately so others could hear. "Excuse me, can I help you? This area is for authorized employees only." The HR director's words rang out across the lobby, drawing attention from everyone within earshot. Conversations halted. Employees froze mid-step. A group of executives paused their discussion by the elevator bank, turning to observe the confrontation. Olivia felt heat rising to her cheeks as dozens of eyes suddenly focused on her. The bulgogi container grew heavy in her hands, the silver gift box seeming to lose its luster under the harsh fluorescent lights and scrutinizing gazes. "I have an appointment," Olivia began, but Rebecca cut her off with a dismissive wave. "We don't allow unauthorized visitors to wander in, claiming to know executives," she announced loudly, her voice echoing off the marble surfaces. "Security protocol." A hush fell over the lobby. The silence was deafening as everyone waited to see what would happen next, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Rebecca Stone's accusation hung in the air like poison. Olivia Carter took a deep breath, her composure a stark contrast to the HR director's hostility. With steady hands, she reached into her purse and produced both her identification card and a neatly folded calendar printout. "I have an appointment," Olivia explained, her voice calm despite the growing audience of curious employees in the lobby. "It's our anniversary, and I wanted to surprise David with lunch." The HR director barely glanced at the documents. Instead, Rebecca shifted her weight, deliberately positioning herself between Olivia and the elevators. Her lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "We don't accommodate unexpected guests, regardless of who they claim to be married to," she said, emphasizing the word "claim" with unmistakable skepticism. "Perhaps you should have called ahead instead of disrupting our workplace." Several onlookers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young intern whispered something to her colleague, both looking increasingly concerned by the confrontation unfolding before them. "And if you just look at the calendar," Olivia persisted, holding the paper higher, "you'll see David approved this visit last week. It's right here in the system." Rebecca's face flushed with anger. Her eyes darted from Olivia's face to the silver-wrapped gift box and container of homemade bulgogi. Something in her seemed to snap. Without warning, she reached for a water bottle sitting on the reception counter. "I've had enough of this disruption," she hissed. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Rebecca unscrewed the cap and, with trembling hands fueled by inexplicable fury, flung the contents directly at Olivia. The water arced through the air before splashing across Olivia's silk outfit, soaking the anniversary gift and food container. The cold liquid shocked Olivia into momentary silence. Water dripped from her carefully styled hair, running down her face and neck, seeping into the delicate fabric of her clothes. The silver wrapping paper on the gift box began to warp and peel. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. The sudden silence was broken only by the sound of water dripping onto the marble floor. Then, as if on cue, the distinctive clicks and beeps of smartphones being activated filled the space. At least 5 employees had instinctively raised their devices, recording the incident with expressions of disbelief. One woman near the coffee station covered her mouth in shock, while a man in a business suit shook his head in visible disapproval. Olivia stood perfectly still, dignity intact despite the water streaming down her face, as the evidence of her humiliation was captured for posterity. Olivia Carter stood frozen in the lobby, water dripping from her silk blouse and forming a small puddle around her designer shoes. The carefully wrapped silver anniversary gift box was soaked through, its delicate paper disintegrating between her trembling fingers. The container of homemade bulgogi she'd spent hours preparing that morning had toppled over, spilling its contents across the polished marble floor. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She would not give Rebecca Stone the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Drawing herself up to her full height, she met the HR director's gaze with quiet dignity that made several onlookers shift uncomfortably. "I am David's wife," she stated simply. Her voice steady, despite the humiliation burning through her. "And I have every right to be here." Rebecca's face flushed, but she didn't back down. "You should have followed proper protocols," she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. The lobby had fallen completely silent. Employees stood frozen, witnessing the scene with a mixture of shock and discomfort. A few had their smartphones partially raised, uncertain whether to document what was unfolding before them. Behind her desk, Martha Harris sat rigid with indecision. The administrative assistant had processed the calendar invite herself 3 days earlier, a surprise anniversary lunch, clearly marked and approved. She'd even smiled at the thoughtfulness of the gesture when scheduling it. Now, watching the aftermath of Rebecca's cruelty, Martha felt sick with her own complicity through silence. Jerome Robinson stood at his security post, his professional mask slipping as he witnessed the injustice. The security guard had greeted Olivia politely when she'd first entered, before Rebecca had intercepted her. He'd noticed her name on the visitor log, but hadn't connected it to the CEO until this moment. Martha's conscience finally won out over her fear. Rising slightly from her chair, she leaned toward Jerome, who had moved closer to her desk during the commotion. "That's the CEO's wife," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. "I processed her visitor request myself. This isn't right." Jerome nodded almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightening as he weighed his options. He'd worked at Parker Tech Solutions for 7 years, needed the job desperately, but the scene before him violated everything he stood for. Olivia remained standing tall amidst the wreckage of her surprise, dignity intact despite her drenched appearance. The water continued to drip, each drop echoing in the stunned silence of the lobby. Jerome Robinson felt his pulse racing as he stood frozen behind the security desk. The security guard's gaze darted between Olivia Carter, standing there soaked and humiliated, and Rebecca Stone, whose face still showed traces of contempt. His mind raced through the potential consequences: speak up and possibly lose the job that paid his rent, or remain silent and betray everything he believed in. Martha's whispered confirmation echoed in his ears. "That's the CEO's wife." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Jerome took a half-step forward, his security badge catching the lobby's bright lights. But before he could intervene, the distinctive ping of the elevator cut through the tense silence. The polished doors slid open with mechanical precision. David Carter stepped out, his confident stride faltering as he absorbed the scene before him. The CEO's normally composed demeanor shifted instantly as he registered the strange tableau in his company's lobby. Employees stood in awkward clusters, phones partially hidden but clearly recording. The air felt electric with discomfort. Then his gaze found Olivia. His wife stood near the reception desk, her elegant outfit completely drenched, water dripping onto the marble floor beneath her. The silver anniversary gift box in her hands was crushed at the corners, its carefully tied ribbon now limp and discolored. The container that had held homemade bulgogi lay toppled nearby, its contents ruined. The transformation on David's face was immediate and profound. His expression moved from confusion to recognition to barely contained fury in the span of seconds. "What happened here?" he demanded, his voice low but trembling with barely suppressed anger. The question cut through the lobby like a blade. Rebecca Stone took an involuntary step backward, her earlier confidence evaporating. The HR director's hands fluttered nervously at her sides as she glanced around for support, finding none. Jerome exchanged a quick look with Martha Harris, who nodded almost imperceptibly from behind her desk. The administrative assistant's eyes held a mix of fear and resolve. Olivia stood perfectly still, dignity intact despite her sodden appearance. Water dripped from her clothes, creating a small puddle around her feet, but her gaze remained steady as she looked at her husband. The employees who had been milling about the lobby seemed to collectively hold their breath. Phones continued recording discreetly, capturing what everyone sensed would be a pivotal moment for Parker Tech Solutions. David Carter's question hung in the air, unanswered, but demanding a response that would change everything. Rebecca Stone's face flushed crimson as she struggled to maintain her composure. The lobby had gone eerily silent, with only the sound of water dripping from Olivia Carter's ruined outfit onto the marble floor. "This woman refused to properly identify herself," Rebecca insisted, her voice higher than usual. "I was simply following protocol to protect company security." She straightened her blazer, avoiding David's piercing gaze. "You know how strict our visitor policies are." Olivia stood tall despite her humiliation, dignity intact even as mascara streaked down her cheeks. "I showed her my ID," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. "I explained I had an appointment." With trembling hands, Olivia handed her husband the container of bulgogi, now waterlogged and ruined. The special anniversary lunch she'd prepared that morning was destroyed. Next came the silver-wrapped gift box, its elegant paper wrinkled and stained. "I made your favorite," she whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. David Carter looked down at the ruined offerings, his expression darkening. The muscles in his jaw tightened as he accepted the printed calendar invitation Olivia pulled from her purse, somehow spared from the worst of the water. The lobby remained frozen in tableau. Several employees still held their smartphones aloft, recording every moment of the unfolding drama. Martha Harris watched from behind her desk, hands clasped tightly together, while Jerome Robinson stood at attention near the security station, his face a careful mask. David examined the calendar printout, which clearly showed Olivia's name, the date, time and purpose: anniversary lunch with wife. He looked up at Rebecca, who had begun to realize the gravity of her mistake. But you could have verified this with a simple phone call to my office, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Rebecca's professional demeanor cracked further. I didn't think— No, David interrupted. You didn't think. You assumed. You acted. And you humiliated my wife in public. The truth was unfolding for everyone to witness. Employees exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others vindicated. A few nodded knowingly, as if they'd seen similar behavior from the HR director before. Olivia placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm, water still dripping from her sleeve. Though soaked and embarrassed, her eyes held a strength that commanded respect from everyone in the room. The calendar invitation was sent last week, she said softly. I just wanted to surprise you for our anniversary. The simplicity of her statement made Rebecca's actions seem all the more cruel. As David's expression hardened further, the HR director seemed to shrink before everyone's eyes, her authority evaporating in real time. David Carter's face hardened as he absorbed the scene before him. His jaw clenched as he read the calendar invite and looked at the ruined lunch, then at his drenched wife. The CEO's gaze swept across the lobby where dozens of employees stood frozen, many still holding their phones. The tension in the air was palpable. You're fired, he told Rebecca Stone without hesitation, his voice steady but charged with barely contained fury. The HR director's face drained of color. David, you can't possibly— Effective immediately, he cut her off. Turn in your badge and clear out your office within the hour. The lobby erupted in whispers and gasps. No one had ever witnessed a termination this public or this swift. Several employees exchanged glances of shock, while others seemed to nod in quiet approval. Rebecca stood motionless, her authority evaporating in real time as employees who had once feared her now watched her downfall. But I was following protocol, Rebecca protested, her voice rising with desperation. She could have been anyone. I was protecting the company. David shook his head, unmoved. My wife had an appointment. She had identification, and even if she didn't, nothing justifies what you just did. He gestured toward the puddle of water on the marble floor. This isn't protocol. This is harassment. Rebecca's shoulders slumped as the reality of her situation sank in. She turned and walked stiffly toward the elevator, the crowd parting silently before her. But David wasn't finished. He turned to Martha Harris and Jerome Robinson, who stood nervously behind the reception desk. The administrative assistant clutched her tablet to her chest, while the security guard shifted uncomfortably from one foot to another. Did either of you know about this meeting? David asked quietly, his tone more measured now, but no less intense. Martha's hand trembled as she stepped forward. She glanced at Olivia, still dripping wet but standing tall, then back at her boss. Making her decision, she produced the digital scheduling log from her tablet. Yes, sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Carter's visit was scheduled 3 days ago. It's right here in the system. She turned the screen toward him, showing Olivia's name clearly marked for a 12:30 appointment with the note, Anniversary Surprise Lunch. Jerome nodded in confirmation. I saw it too, sir. I was about to intervene when you arrived. David looked between them, then at his wife. The public humiliation of Olivia Carter had just set in motion a chain of events that would transform Parker Tech Solutions forever. The video of Rebecca Stone dousing Olivia Carter spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes of the incident, 3 different angles appeared online, each more damning than the last. By the time David Carter had escorted his wife to his office, the hashtag #JackParkerTechScandal was trending nationwide, with view counts climbing into the hundreds of thousands. It's everywhere, whispered a member of the hastily assembled PR team, scrolling through her phone in horror. The company's social media accounts were flooded with outrage. More concerning were the comments beneath the viral videos, former employees and interviewees sharing their own experiences of discrimination at Parker Tech Solutions. In the CEO's office, Olivia sat motionless on the leather couch, her silk outfit still damp. The ruined anniversary gift placed carefully on the coffee table. David paced back and forth, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from board members and investors. "I'm so sorry," he said, kneeling before his wife, "not just as your husband, but as the person who built this company." He took her hands in his. "I never saw what was happening right under my nose." Olivia looked into his eyes. "Did you know about Rebecca's behavior toward other people of color?" David shook his head, shame evident on his face. "I should have. That's the problem. I created a culture where someone like her could thrive while hurting others." Outside the office, chaos reigned. Lisa Park, the general counsel, was already preparing statements and assessing legal exposure. Michael Torres, huddled with investors, trying to stem the financial bleeding as the company's stock price began to plummet. Meanwhile, Martha Harris sat at her desk, trembling as she watched the video of herself in the background, saying nothing as the incident unfolded. Jerome Robinson placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing in the end," he said quietly. "But not soon enough," Martha replied, wiping away tears. On the 32nd floor, the PR team drafted and redrafted statements, none capturing the gravity of the situation. "We need to announce concrete actions," insisted one young team member, only to be silenced by her superior. Back in the CEO's office, Olivia finally stood up. Despite her disheveled appearance, she carried herself with dignity. "What happens now?" she asked. David looked at his wife, the woman who had supported him through building this company, now humiliated in its lobby. He made a decision that would alter the course of Parker Tech Solutions forever. "Everything changes," he said, "starting today." The boardroom on the 35th floor of Parker Tech Solutions had never felt so suffocating. 12 executives sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of financial charts displayed on the wall screen. The numbers told a devastating story. The company's stock had plummeted 23% since the video went viral. Michael Torres adjusted his tie nervously before speaking. "We've lost over 100 million in market value since yesterday," the CFO explained, pointing to a particularly alarming red graph. "Major investors are threatening to pull out completely. This isn't just bad press, it's an existential threat." Across the table, Lisa Park spread several documents before her. The general counsel's usually composed demeanor had given way to visible stress. "The legal exposure is worse," she said, her voice low but firm. "We're looking at potential class action lawsuits from employees alleging systematic discrimination. Conservative estimates put our liability at 30 million minimum, and that's before considering regulatory investigations." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to David Carter. The CEO sat motionless at the head of the table, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched visibly beneath his skin. For 15 excruciating seconds, he said nothing, simply staring at the catastrophic projections. "How many incidents like this have we swept under the rug?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many Rebecca Stones have we promoted while ignoring their behavior?" No one dared answer. David stood suddenly, placing both palms flat on the table. "I've spent the last 3 hours with my wife. Do you know what she told me? That she wasn't even surprised by what happened. She expected it." He walked to the window overlooking the city. "We're not just fixing a PR problem. We're going to change the entire company, every policy, every procedure, every person who thinks like Rebecca Stone." Michael Torres cleared his throat. "David, with all due respect, We need to focus on damage control first. Maybe a public apology. A donation to... No. David's voice cut through the room like steel. That's exactly the kind of superficial response that got us here. We're going to tear it all down and rebuild from scratch. He turned back to face his leadership team. Some of you won't survive this transformation. Some of you shouldn't. But when we're done, Parker Tech will either be a model of what a company should be, or it won't exist at all. The declaration hung in the air, marking the beginning of a painful, year-long transformation that would test every leader in the room. No one spoke as David Carter walked out, leaving behind a boardroom of executives confronting their complicity in a culture they had helped create. The corridors of Parker Tech Solutions buzzed with whispers and anxious glances. Employees huddled in break rooms and stairwells, their voices low as they discussed what everyone now called the incident. The company-wide email from David Carter had been brief but ominous. A full review of our workplace culture begins today. Martha Harris sat at her desk, watching colleagues pack personal items into boxes, not because they'd been fired, but because they feared they might be next. For the first time in her 7 years at Parker Tech, she felt a flicker of hope. Someone had finally seen the truth she'd witnessed daily, but never dared speak aloud. "Do you think they'll come for us next?" a voice asked. Jerome Robinson leaned against her cubicle wall, his security uniform perfectly pressed, despite the chaos around them. Martha shook her head. "We did the right thing." "The right thing doesn't always keep you employed," the security guard replied, his eyes darting toward the executive floor. "Oh, I've got 3 kids and a mortgage." Across town, Rebecca Stone sat alone in her apartment, blinds drawn against the photographers who'd discovered her address. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, journalists requesting comments, former colleagues cutting ties, and thousands of strangers calling her every vile name imaginable. The former HR director scrolled through her social media, watching her life implode in real time. A corporate leadership award from last year had been rescinded. Her alma mater had removed her from their distinguished alumni page. Even her book club had texted to say her membership was under review. Rebecca closed her laptop and poured herself another glass of wine. The woman who had built her career on rules and protocols now found herself replaying that moment in the lobby. Why had she reacted so viscerally to Olivia Carter? Was it really about security protocols? Or something deeper she'd never acknowledged? Back at Parker Tech, rumors of a Department of Justice investigation spread like wildfire. Employees whispered about mass terminations, while others secretly compiled evidence of past discrimination they'd witnessed or experienced. Martha found a note on her desk. "Thank you for speaking up." No signature, just a small drawing of a lighthouse. Later that day, she noticed similar notes on the desks of others who'd witnessed the incident. Jerome Robinson patrolled the lobby where it had all happened, wondering if his moment of hesitation had cost him everything or opened a door to something better. He watched as maintenance workers installed a new security system, one that would record every interaction at the front desk. For accountability, they told him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. The Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into Parker Tech Solutions, hiring and promotion practices just 8 days after the incident. The announcement came via a stern-faced spokesperson on national television, sending the company's stock plummeting another 15% by closing bell. "We have reason to believe this incident reflects systemic issues," the Justice Department representative stated, while David Carter watched from his office, jaw clenched but unsurprised. What shocked him more were the documents that began appearing on his desk, leaked by anonymous employees who had witnessed Olivia's humiliation and found their courage. Years of internal communications revealed that his wife wasn't the first black person to face discrimination within the company's walls. One email from Rebecca Stone to Michael Torres, dated just 3 months earlier, suggested reconsidering a qualified black candidate because she might not fit our culture. Another memo outlined an unwritten policy of routing minority applicants to lower-paying departments regardless of qualifications. Lisa Park entered David's office without knocking, her face ashen. "There's more," she said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Statistical analysis of our promotion patterns over 5 years. The numbers are indefensible." The data showed black employees waited an average of 23 months longer for promotions than their white counterparts with identical performance reviews. Women of color fared worst of all. "How did I not see this?" David whispered, the weight of his complicity settling on his shoulders. "The system was designed so you wouldn't," Lisa replied, her legal mind already calculating the damages. Meanwhile, across the city, Jerome Robinson received an anonymous message on his smartphone. A former security colleague had compiled video evidence of Rebecca Stone's pattern of random security checks that predominantly targeted minority visitors. Jerome forwarded it directly to the Department of Justice. At her desk, Martha Harris discovered years of complaints buried in the HR system, complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from official records. With trembling fingers, she compiled them into a single document and sent it to both David and federal investigators. The company's dirty secrets were spilling out faster than anyone could contain them. What had begun with a single viral video had become an avalanche of revelations. That evening, David Carter called an emergency board meeting. "We have 2 choices," he told the assembled executives, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "We can fight this investigation and lose everything. Or we can embrace radical transparency and reform." Michael Torres started to object, but David silenced him with a raised hand. "I'm not asking for permission," the CEO said. "I'm telling you how we survive." Olivia Carter sat alone in her living room, staring at the television without really seeing it. 3 weeks had passed since that humiliating moment in the Parker Tech lobby, yet the feeling of cold water soaking through her silk blouse remained vivid. The video had been viewed millions of times, her private pain transformed into a public spectacle. "You could just walk away from all this," David said softly, joining her on the couch. "Nobody would blame you." She turned to her husband, studying the new lines of stress etched across his face. The scandal had aged him, too. "I can't pretend it didn't happen," Olivia replied, "and I won't let it become just another viral moment that everyone forgets." The next morning, she walked into Parker Tech Solutions for the first time since the incident. Employees averted their eyes, unsure how to acknowledge her presence. David led her to the boardroom where Michael Torres and Lisa Park waited with financial projections and legal documents. $10 million, Olivia announced, placing her hand firmly on the table. "Not for lawsuits or settlements, but for real change." The CFO's eyebrows shot up. "And that's an enormous commitment during this crisis," he protested, shuffling through his papers. The shareholders will understand that discrimination is bad business," she interrupted. "This fund will finance training, recruitment reforms, and mentorship programs across the entire company." Over the following days, Olivia worked tirelessly alongside David to structure the initiative. She interviewed employees at all levels, including Martha Harris, whose quiet courage that day had not gone unnoticed. 2 weeks later, Olivia stood before a packed auditorium at Parker Tech headquarters. Camera flashes punctuated the tense silence as board members, employees, and journalists waited for her to speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "I came to this building last month to celebrate love," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. Instead, I experienced something that thousands of people face every day without cameras recording it. Humiliation, discrimination, powerlessness. She outlined the fund's objectives without referring to her notes. The room remained utterly still. "We can't erase what happened," Olivia said, meeting the gaze of those in the front row. "But we can make sure it never happens again. Not here, not anywhere we have influence." When she finished, the silence lingered for several heartbeats before someone began to applaud. Others joined until the sound filled the room. David watched from the side, pride and concern mingling in his expression. Olivia had made her choice. The path forward would be difficult, but she would transform her pain into purpose. The work had only just begun. The reforms at Parker Tech Solutions cut deeper than anyone anticipated. David Carter wasn't content with surface-level changes. He wanted to rebuild the company's DNA. Within weeks, hiring panels became completely anonymous, with applicants identified only by numbers and qualifications to eliminate unconscious bias. Large digital screens appeared throughout the building, displaying real-time diversity metrics that couldn't be ignored. The data showed not just demographics, but also promotion rates, salary equity, and retention statistics across different groups. Martha Harris, once a hesitant administrative assistant afraid to speak up, now headed the company's newly formed inclusive recruitment task force. Her promotion raised eyebrows among some executives who questioned her qualifications, but David stood firm. "Martha has something more valuable than an MBA," he told the board. "She has integrity and first-hand knowledge of our failings." Under her leadership, the task force overhauled recruitment practices. They partnered with historically black colleges, expanded internship opportunities in underserved communities, and implemented blind resume reviews. Martha's quiet determination and organizational skills proved invaluable as she methodically dismantled barriers that had kept talented people from advancing. Meanwhile, Jerome Robinson underwent his own transformation. The security guard who had witnessed Olivia's humiliation now directed Parker Tech's whistleblower protection program. His office, once a small security desk in the lobby, was now positioned prominently on the executive floor, a physical reminder that speaking truth to power was valued. "I remember what it feels like to stay silent when you should speak up," Jerome told new employees during orientation. That doesn't happen here anymore. He established anonymous reporting channels and a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation. His calm presence and unwavering fairness earned him respect across departments. The changes weren't merely structural. The company culture shifted in tangible ways. Meetings became more inclusive, with facilitators ensuring all voices were heard. Mentorship programs paired senior leaders with promising employees from underrepresented groups. Even the physical workspace transformed, with the infamous lobby redesigned to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Some employees initially resisted, uncomfortable with the scrutiny and new expectations. But as the quarters passed, the results spoke for themselves. Retention improved, innovation accelerated. The company attracted talent that previously wouldn't have considered Parker Tech. For Jerome and Martha, the transformation was deeply personal. They exchanged knowing glances during company-wide meetings, silently acknowledging how far they'd come from that terrible day in the lobby. Their promotions weren't just symbolic gestures. They represented a fundamental shift in who held power and how decisions were made. The boardroom fell silent as Michael Torres slammed his hand on the polished table. "We're bleeding money," he declared, pointing to the quarterly projections displayed on the screen. "In this diversity fund is a $10 million PR stunt we simply cannot afford." Several executives nodded in agreement. The CFO had spent weeks building a coalition of resistance against the reforms David Carter had implemented. Behind closed doors, Michael had been suggesting that the changes were merely an emotional overreaction to what happened with Olivia. "The shareholders are getting nervous," he continued. "I propose we scale back the fund to $2 million and postpone the diversity hiring initiatives until next fiscal year." Olivia Carter sat calmly at the opposite end of the table. Though she wasn't officially an executive, David had insisted on her presence during these discussions. The room tensed as she opened her leather portfolio. "I appreciate your financial concerns," she began, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of hostility. But I've compiled data from 27 companies that implemented similar diversity programs." She distributed a document to everyone present. In 83% of cases, profits increased within 18 months. Employee retention improved by 31%. Lisa Park, the general counsel, studied the numbers with growing interest. "These figures are compelling," she admitted. Michael wasn't convinced. "Theory versus practice," he scoffed. "Though we're talking about real money at stake." "Real people too," Olivia countered. She pulled up slides showing testimonials from employees who had benefited from the new whistleblower program Jerome Robinson now headed. "These aren't just statistics. This is our future workforce." The battle continued for weeks. Michael and his allies attempted to undermine the reforms through budget cuts, delayed implementation, and bureaucratic roadblocks. They circulated anonymous memos questioning whether the incident with Rebecca Stone had been blown out of proportion, but Olivia proved remarkably resilient. Each morning, she arrived armed with new data, case studies, and strategic counter-arguments. Her approach wasn't emotional, it was methodical and business-focused, speaking the language executives understood. One by one, the skeptics began to change their minds. Even Michael's closest allies couldn't deny the preliminary results. Applications from top-tier diverse candidates had increased by 40%. The victory came at a cost. Each night, Olivia returned home exhausted. David would find her at the kitchen table, surrounded by research papers, often asleep over her laptop. The emotional toll of fighting the very system that had humiliated her was immense. "You don't have to carry this alone," David told her one evening. She looked up with tired eyes. "If I don't, who will?" The story of Parker Tech Solutions had transcended corporate walls, igniting a firestorm across America's business landscape. Major news networks ran special segments on the water incident, as it became known, while investigative journalists began unearthing similar cases throughout the tech industry. 3 major Silicon Valley companies faced class action lawsuits within weeks, their dirty laundry exposed by emboldened employees who had witnessed Olivia Carter's vindication. "This isn't just about one company," declared a prominent technology magazine in its cover story. "It's about an industry built on exclusion." The article featured damning statistics and internal memos from 12 tech giants, revealing a pattern of discrimination that had persisted for decades. Olivia found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from television shows, podcasts, and newspapers. Walking into a coffee shop became impossible without someone recognizing her face from the viral video, which had now been viewed over 20 million times. "You're so brave," strangers would tell her, while others sent vicious messages to her social media accounts, calling her an opportunist or worse. The Carter family hired security after receiving several threatening letters at their home address. "I never wanted to be the face of this movement," she confided to David one night, scrolling through hundreds of notifications. "I just wanted to bring you lunch on our anniversary." Her husband squeezed her hand, the strain visible in his eyes. Their marriage, once a private sanctuary, now existed under constant scrutiny. Tabloids speculated about their relationship, publishing unflattering photos and fabricated quotes from inside sources. The pressure was immense. "Maybe we should take some time away," David suggested. "Just the family. Somewhere quiet." But there was no escaping the conversation Olivia had inadvertently started. When the Carters attempted a weekend getaway, fellow hotel guests secretly recorded them at dinner, the footage appearing online hours later. The relentless attention affected their children too. Their son came home from school in tears after classmates showed him cruel memes featuring his mother's distressed face from the video. Through it all, Olivia maintained her dignity. She declined most interviews, but carefully chose platforms where she could speak meaningfully about workplace discrimination. She partnered with Lisa Park to ensure her words couldn't be twisted against Parker Tech or its reform efforts. "I never asked to become a symbol," she told a respected journalist in her first major interview. "But now that I am one, I intend to use this platform responsibly." The statement resonated across social media, with many praising her grace under pressure. Meanwhile, David worked tirelessly to shield his wife while implementing the promised changes at Parker Tech. Their relationship tested but ultimately strengthened by the crucible of public scrutiny. The email arrived unexpectedly in Olivia Carter's inbox. Its sender, a former competitor who had once dismissed her at industry events. "What happened to you was unacceptable," it read. "I've been there too." Within days, more messages followed. CEOs, executives, and employees from across the tech sector sharing similar experiences and offering solidarity. "It's like opening a floodgate," Olivia told her husband one evening. David nodded, squeezing her hand as she scrolled through dozens of testimonials. These unexpected allies provided not just emotional support, but practical advice on navigating the treacherous waters of corporate reform. At Parker Tech, Martha Harris discovered her voice growing stronger each day. The administrative assistant, who once whispered concerns behind closed doors, now led weekly roundtable discussions where employees could speak freely about workplace challenges. Her office became an unofficial sanctuary for women and minorities seeking guidance. "I never thought I'd be doing this," Martha confessed to Jerome Robinson as they shared lunch in the company cafeteria. "But every time someone walks out of my office standing taller, I remember why it matters." Jerome smiled. "You're changing lives. That's more than most people can say about their work." Martha's mentorship program quickly became the company's most oversubscribed initiative. Her approach was gentle but effective, combining practical career advice with emotional support for those navigating difficult workplace dynamics. Meanwhile, after 6 months of complete silence, Rebecca Stone emerged from seclusion for a prime-time television interview. Seated across from a renowned journalist, the former HR director appeared thinner, her confident demeanor replaced by cautious reflection. "I failed that day," Rebecca admitted, her voice steady despite her evident discomfort. "I humiliated another woman in public, and there's no excuse for that." But as the interview progressed, her tone shifted. "The system trained me to be suspicious, to protect the company at all costs. I was rewarded for years for exactly this behavior, just never so publicly, never with cameras rolling." The interview ignited fierce debate online. Some viewers praised her honesty, arguing that corporate culture, not individual actors A, was the true villain. Others dismissed her explanation as deflection, demanding she face legal consequences beyond losing her job. Olivia watched the interview alone, David having offered to give her space. She found herself unexpectedly moved by Rebecca's words, recognizing the complex truth they contained. The next morning, she added a new slide to her presentation for the board. Our goal isn't punishment, it's transformation. After 6 months of intense scrutiny, the Department of Justice formally closed its investigation into Parker Tech Solutions. The official statement praised the company as a model of rapid and meaningful corporate reform and highlighted the sweeping changes implemented under David Carter's leadership. What had begun as a public relations nightmare had transformed into a blueprint for institutional change. Within weeks, 12 major corporations announced they would adopt Parker's diversity standards. Lisa Park, who had initially feared devastating legal consequences, now found herself fielding calls from general counsels across the country seeking guidance on implementing similar policies. "We didn't just avoid disaster," she told David during a quiet moment between meetings. "We're actually leading the way." The transformation within the company walls was even more remarkable. The cold silence that had once permeated the corridors had given way to open dialogue. Employees who had previously kept their heads down now participated enthusiastically in mentorship programs. The diversity metrics displayed throughout the building showed steady improvement, a constant reminder of progress made and work still to be done. Martha Harris, once a hesitant administrative assistant, now commanded respect as she led inclusion workshops for department heads. Her team had grown to 15 people, all dedicated to ensuring the company's hiring practices remained transparent and equitable. Jerome Robinson's whistleblower program had already identified and addressed 3 potential incidents before they could escalate. Even Michael Torres, initially resistant to change, had come around after seeing the financial data. "I was wrong," he admitted during a board meeting. "Our stock price has recovered completely. And employee retention is at an all-time high." Olivia Carter watched these developments with complex emotions. Pride in what had been accomplished warred with the personal cost she had paid. The nightmares still came occasionally, standing in that lobby, water dripping from her clothes, eyes staring. Public recognition brought its own challenges, with strangers approaching her in restaurants and stores to share their own discrimination stories. Was it worth it?" David asked her one evening as they reviewed the latest company reports. Olivia gazed at the photographs of employees celebrating at the most recent diversity initiative launch. Faces of all colors smiled back at her, including those of Martha and Jerome standing confidently at the forefront. "It shouldn't have happened," she said quietly, "but since it did, yes, it was worth it." She closed the folder, haunted but resolute. The path forward remained challenging, but the foundation for lasting change had been firmly established. The Carters' home, once a sanctuary from the corporate world, had transformed into a fortress under siege. Olivia Carter pulled the curtains closed as another photographer lingered at the edge of their property. Their 9-year-old daughter had stopped wanting to play in the front yard, and their 12-year-old son had deleted all his social media accounts after classmates shared cruel memes about his mother. "They're still out there," Olivia sighed, turning to David, who was reviewing security footage on his tablet. The incident at Parker Tech had made them unwilling celebrities in a drama they never asked to join. "I got another threat today," David admitted, his voice low to prevent the children from overhearing. "Security is monitoring it. But I think we should consider accepting that private security detail Jerome recommended." The threats had started as angry emails, then escalated to phone calls and letters. One particularly disturbing package had been intercepted by their mail carrier, a doll with dark skin, soaked in water, with a note that made David's blood run cold. Dinner times became strategy sessions after the children went to bed. The couple huddled at their kitchen table, sometimes joined by Lisa Park, who advised them on legal protections against stalking and harassment. "I never thought standing up for what's right would put our family at risk," Olivia whispered one night, her fingers intertwined with her husband's. "Sometimes I wonder if we should have just let it go." David squeezed her hand. "And become part of the problem. That's not who we are." Their children showed remarkable resilience. When their son overheard a grocery store clerk whispering about his parents, he calmly said, "My mum and dad are fixing things that were broken for a long time." Their daughter created artwork depicting her parents as superheroes, which Olivia secretly framed for her office. The family created new rituals to strengthen their bonds. Sunday became no news day, when phones were stored in a basket and board games took center stage. They took cooking classes together. Learning to make dishes from around the world, David taught the children to meditate, a skill he'd adopted to manage his own stress. As their anniversary approached again, the media attention had finally begun to wane. New scandals had captured public attention, though the changes at Parker Tech continued to reshape the industry. On the night of their 6th anniversary, they dined at home, bulgogi that their children had helped prepare. There were no silver-wrapped gifts this time, just handmade cards and the quiet triumph of a family that had weathered a storm together. "To us," David toasted, raising his glass. "To justice," Olivia added, with a smile that had regained its warmth. Their children clinked their juice glasses against their parents' wine. "To superheroes," they chimed in unison, making everyone laugh. Olivia Carter's journey from victim to advocate transformed her life in ways she never imagined. Universities, corporate retreats, and industry conferences across the United States clamored for her perspective. She found herself sharing stages with thought leaders who had written books she once studied, all eager to hear how one moment in a lobby changed an entire corporate landscape. "The hardest part isn't telling the story," she confided to an audience of graduate students at a prestigious business school. "It's reliving it each time." Yet she continued. Knowing her vulnerability created space for others to speak their truths. David often watched from the back of these venues, his pride evident as his wife articulated the painful lessons they'd learned together. Their partnership had deepened through adversity, each speech reinforcing their shared commitment to lasting change. At a technology conference in San Francisco, Olivia met 3 women who had experienced similar humiliation, but lacked the platform to fight back. She listened to their stories over dinner, then invited them to speak alongside her at future events. "My voice alone isn't enough," she explained to the event organizers. "Real change requires a chorus." Martha Harris occasionally joined these panels, offering the perspective of someone who had witnessed discrimination and found the courage to stand against it. Her quiet determination complemented Olivia's passionate advocacy, showing audiences that heroes come in many forms. The pinnacle of Olivia's influence came at the National Corporate Responsibility Summit, where 500 industry leaders gathered to discuss the future of workplace ethics. Wearing a tailored suit that exuded confidence, she approached the podium as cameras flashed and the room fell silent. "2 years ago, I stood in a lobby, soaking wet and humiliated," she began, her voice steady. "Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as evidence that systems can change when we demand better." For 40 minutes, she held the audience spellbound, weaving personal pain with practical solutions. When she reached her conclusion, the room leaned forward collectively. "Courage," she said, meeting the eyes of lawmakers and executives in the front row, "is not the absence of fear. It's making the right choice, even when you're terrified. Each of you will face moments when doing the right thing feels impossible. In those moments, remember, your decision affects not just one person, but creates ripples that transform entire communities." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. As Olivia stepped away from the microphone, she caught David's eye in the crowd. His subtle nod said everything words couldn't. Their pain had purpose, their struggle meaning, their future hope. Parker Tech Solutions had transformed into a beacon of progress within the tech industry. What began as a humiliating incident in the lobby had catalyzed a revolution that extended far beyond the company's walls. Employee satisfaction scores reached record highs, with internal surveys showing 95% of staff felt valued regardless of background or identity. The financial results surprised even the most skeptical executives. Quarterly profits had not only recovered, but exceeded projections by 17%. Michael Torres, who had initially resisted the changes, now proudly presented these figures at industry conferences, acknowledging how diversity had strengthened their business model. Martha Harris, once a hesitant administrative assistant afraid to speak up, now headed the company's inclusive recruitment division. Her department received the prestigious Innovation in Workplace Equity Award, with judges praising their anonymous hiring panels and bias reduction protocols. Martha often reflected on that watershed moment when she'd whispered to Jerome about the CEO's wife standing soaked in the lobby. "Sometimes courage is just a whisper," she told new employees during orientation. Jerome Robinson's whistleblower protection program became equally influential. 23 major corporations had already implemented versions of his framework, which provided safe channels for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. The security guard who once feared losing his job for speaking truth now trained executives across the country. Lisa Park, working alongside David, had transformed the legal department from a defensive shield into a proactive force for accountability. Their transparent approach to past failures had become a case study at law schools nationwide. For Olivia Carter, the journey had been both painful and profound. The woman who once stood humiliated and dripping in the lobby now commanded boardrooms with quiet authority. Her speaking engagements attracted thousands, and her advocacy fund had already supported 37 discrimination cases across the country. "The water dried," she told a journalist during a rare personal interview, "but the memory remains. I use that memory not as a wound, but as fuel." David watched his wife's transformation with pride and occasional concern. The public spotlight had taken its toll, yet strengthened their partnership in unexpected ways. Together, they navigated the complex terrain of being both symbols and humans. Even Rebecca Stone had found an unexpected path forward. After months of reflection and therapy, she now consulted with companies on recognizing unconscious bias, using her own downfall as a cautionary tale. The revolution that began with a splash of water had rippled outward, changing not just Parker Tech, but an entire industry's approach to dignity, equity, and human value. 1 year to the day since water had cascaded down Olivia Carter's silk outfit, the Parker Tech Solutions lobby stood transformed, gone were the cold marble floors and sterile atmosphere. In their place, warm wood accents, comfortable seating areas, and most importantly, a sense of belonging that permeated the space. Employees gathered in a semicircle, their faces reflecting the journey they'd undertaken. Martha Harris, now Director of Inclusive Recruitment, stood proudly beside Jerome Robinson, whose whistleblower protection program had become a model for the industry. Both wore expressions that spoke of hard-won victories. "Today isn't about remembering pain," Olivia said, her voice carrying across the hushed lobby. "It's about celebrating what we built from it." She squeezed David's hand as he stood beside her, his eyes reflecting both pride and lingering regret. The CEO nodded toward the veiled wall where the security desk once stood. "This company was built on innovation, but we forgot to innovate our humanity. That changes forever, starting now." Their children fidgeted excitedly nearby as Olivia approached the covered mural. Michael Torres watched from the back, his initial resistance to change having evolved into cautious support after seeing the company's profits soar under the new initiatives. Even Lisa Park, who had once worried only about legal exposure, now spoke passionately about ethical leadership. With steady hands, Olivia cut the ribbon. The covering fell away to reveal a stunning mosaic depicting diverse faces, intertwined hands, and at its center, a single water droplet, creating ripples that expanded outward. The crowd erupted in applause. Several employees wiped away tears, including some who had recorded the incident that day. Martha stepped forward, presenting Olivia with a bound book. "Every story of change that's happened here," she explained. "Your courage gave us all permission to find ours." In the corner, a journalist who had covered the story from the beginning scribbled notes. The Parker tech transformation had inspired 27 other major corporations to overhaul their cultures. 3 states had passed new workplace protection laws nicknamed the Olivia Acts. As the celebration continued, David addressed the assembled crowd. "One voice speaking truth changed everything," he said, his gaze finding Jerome and Martha in turn. And then another voice joined, and another. Olivia looked out at the faces, some familiar, many new, all part of the revolution that had begun with her humiliation and ended with their collective liberation. The anniversary that had once been marked by pain now symbolized possibility. "This is just the beginning," she said simply, her voice steady and sure. The ripples, like those in the mural behind her, would continue spreading outward, changing everything they touched.